The valley opened beneath the fading light of dusk, a place where shadows clung to the mountains like secrets too heavy to be spoken aloud. A man rode into that stillness, carrying not only the dust of a long trail, but also the weight of years he never spoke of. His name was Cole Bannister, though few knew it, and fewer dared to ask. In the quiet rhythm of his horse's hooves, in the creak of worn leather, and the whisper of the evening wind, there was a silence that hinted at stories untold. He was not simply a wanderer seeking land. He was a soul burdened by memory, a soldier who had crossed too many battlefields to count. And yet here he was, drawn by the fragile promise of redemption, as if the very earth beneath his feet had called his name. The valley seemed alive, shimmering with the pale glow of the creek and the murmur of cottonwoods, offering him a kind of solace he had almost forgotten existed. The air smelled of pine and fresh water, a contrast to the smoke and iron of places that had nearly broken him. For the first time in years, hope stirred in him, not the loud kind that clamors for attention, but the gentle, healing kind that eases like cool water over burns too long endured. This land was not just fertile ground, it was a whisper of possibility, an invitation to stop running, to believe that even wounded hearts could bloom again. Yet fate never opens a door without letting shadows slip through its cracks. Cole knew this peace was fragile. The valley was beautiful, but beauty often carried thorns. Whispers in the town spoke of William Harrington, a man whose wealth and power coiled around every street and church pew, whose shadow reached even into the earth itself. It was toward Harrington's land that Cole unknowingly steered, guided not by greed, but by the single word written in an old advertisement: redemption. Perhaps, he thought, a man like him might still deserve it. And then there was her, Caroline Bennett. He had not yet met her, but already destiny was threading its quiet pattern, weaving her presence into the fabric of his journey. Somewhere in the white cottage near the church, a woman with auburn hair and steady green eyes prepared to carry her own battles with grace. Soon their paths would cross, and nothing in this valley would ever be the same. The beginning was never meant to be loud. It was meant to draw you in softly, the way twilight slips over a field, the way one heart begins to lean unknowingly toward another. And as this story unfolds, every word you hear, every image you hold, is meant to soothe as much as it stirs, to remind you that even the most scarred soul can find healing, and even the loneliest rider can discover love. If in these moments you feel a spark of warmth, a stirring in your own heart, then let it be known. Share your thoughts, leave a trace of yourself here in the form of a like or a comment, and walk with us further. Your presence gives this story life, and your support allows it to bloom brighter. So let us step forward together into Redemption Valley, where the dust of the past lingers, but the promise of love rises like dawn after the longest night. And as the air cools and the stars gather, Cole Bannister's story is only beginning, one that will not only test the strength of a man, but awaken the fire of a woman who has never been afraid to stand in the light. Their journey awaits, and with it the tender unfolding of a love that might heal them both. The bell above the general store door gave a soft chime as it opened, but what caught Cole's attention was not the sound, it was the pair of eyes that met his across the room. Green, steady, clear as a mountain spring, and framed by auburn hair gathered too tightly, as if the woman who wore it had long since chosen discipline over softness. Caroline Bennett. She stood beside an elderly woman, her hand gentle yet firm on the frail shoulder, and in that single moment Cole felt the world slow. He had faced gunfire, storms, and long winters alone, but nothing had ever unsettled him like the quiet strength radiating from her gaze. She studied him as if she could see through dust and scars, weighing the man behind the name before a single word was spoken. Caroline had lived her life within the valley's shadows and light, daughter of a preacher who believed truth was worth dying for. She carried that same fire, though bound in modest dress and a calm voice that masked her wounds. When she spoke, her words were measured, but there was an undercurrent of defiance in her tone, as though she had grown used to standing alone against men with louder voices and heavier fists. To Cole, weary from years of drifting, her presence was both unsettling and healing, like a hymn remembered in a place where he thought God had long stopped listening. The conversation that followed was ordinary on the surface, questions about land, about the homestead she and her aunt now oversaw, but beneath it lay something far more profound. Each exchange carried weight, a subtle testing of trust, a recognition of spirit. Caroline wanted to know why he had come, why this land mattered to him, and though Cole gave her plain answers, he felt as if she was searching for the unspoken truth, whether this stranger was a man who would turn away from injustice or one who might stand firm. He could not know it then, but her questions were not only for herself, they were for the entire valley. Outside, the town hummed with life, the gossip of neighbors, the creak of wagons, the smell of coal dust drifting down from Harrington's mine. Inside the small cottage, though, time seemed to pause. Cole signed the deed, the ink still glistening when Caroline's hand brushed against his to seal the document. It was nothing, a simple motion, a formality, but it lingered in him, the way her touch carried both caution and strength. He had been called many things: soldier, lawman, drifter, killer. But in her presence, he felt for the first time in years the possibility of another name, a man capable of belonging. Caroline, too, felt a shift she could not name. She had built walls of resolve after her father's death, after Harrington's threats, after years of silence forced upon her by a world that did not welcome women who carried truth in their voices. Yet this stranger, with his quiet eyes and scarred hands, unsettled the fortress she had so carefully built. She told herself it was caution, suspicion, the natural wariness of a woman who had learned what power could do in the wrong hands. But late that evening, as she sat alone with a lamp flickering low, she found herself wondering about the man who had spoken the word redemption as if it were more than a valley's name, as if it were a prayer. In the days that followed, their paths crossed again, drawn together by both necessity and fate. A word shared here, a glance exchanged there, moments small but carrying the weight of something larger forming in the silence between them. For Cole, it was a fragile beginning of hope. For Caroline, it was the first stirrings of trust where she had vowed never to trust again. And for those who watched from the outside, it was only a man purchasing land, only a woman doing her duty. But beneath the ordinary, something extraordinary had begun. If you feel the tremor of this moment, if the story already stirs warmth or curiosity in you, let your presence be known. Like, share a thought in a comment, or subscribe to Walk Further with Cole and Caroline. Each gesture keeps the fire of their journey alive, a reminder that stories, like hearts, bloom brighter when nurtured together. And so, as Cole stepped out into the sunlight, deed in hand, and Caroline watched from the doorway with an expression she quickly disguised. The air in Redemption Valley carried a new tension, subtle, invisible, but undeniable. Something had shifted, and both of them knew it. Neither would name it yet, but the path ahead had been set, leading them into storms of danger and tenderness alike, toward a love that neither had dared to hope for, and yet could no longer escape. The morning broke with a strange stillness, the kind that whispers change before a soul is ready to receive it. Cole stood on the rise of his new land, boots pressing into the damp earth as mist lifted like veils from the creek. The world looked untouched, promising, but beneath the beauty, unease lingered like smoke after a fire. Redemption Valley might have been named for second chances, yet already he could sense how much power and shadow lay hidden here. The soil beneath his boots was rich, the water clear, the meadow wide. But it was not free of claim, not free of envy. Somewhere in the valley, William Harrington would be tightening his grip, a man who ruled with wealth and fear, and Cole's mere presence was an act of defiance. He ran his hand over the rough grain of the unfinished cabin, Hiram Stevens's last effort before death. The walls half raised, the roof bare to the open sky, and still Cole could picture it complete. A hearth burning steady, a woman's laughter carried across the room, the sound of children's feet on floorboards. He had not allowed himself such thoughts in years, but now they came unbidden, healing and dangerous in equal measure. Perhaps it was the valley. Perhaps it was the memory of Caroline's eyes, steady as a prayer, that made such dreams flicker where he had only known ashes. By midday, he heard hoofbeats. Caroline's auburn hair caught the light as she rode into view with a group of ranchers, their faces grave. She carried herself with quiet command, a presence more compelling than any starched preacher or polished politician. The men spoke of what they had found. Luis Rodriguez, hanged beneath ancient oaks, a crude sign nailed above him declaring Harrington's justice. It was not only a killing, it was a message, and Cole understood at once why they had come to him. Justice had been twisted into cruelty, and now the valley itself seemed to cry for someone to bear witness. Caroline dismounted, her steps measured, though her face was pale. She glanced at Cole not as a stranger, but as if testing whether he would stand firm or look away, as so many men had done before. When he cut Rodriguez down with careful hands and tucked the man's small wooden cross into his pocket, Caroline's gaze softened almost imperceptibly. Something in her healed at that moment, a wound carved years ago when her father's death had been dismissed as an accident, when truth had been buried beneath Harrington's wealth. She saw in Cole not only a man with a gun, but a man who honored the dead. That night, as stars spilled like silver dust across the Wyoming sky, Cole sat by his fire outside the half-finished cabin, the weight of the day pressing against him. Caroline's words still echoed. "Be careful. Harrington does not invite without purpose." He thought of her voice, calm yet edged with fire, and wondered how a woman who bore so much loss could still speak with such strength. His hands, scarred and unsteady, rested on the deed tucked inside his coat. For the first time in decades, he felt that perhaps this was more than land. It was a chance to stand, to build, to belong. But belonging would not come easily. The valley's beauty carried thorns sharper than any blade. Harrington's invitation would soon arrive, gilded with courtesy but steeped in menace. Caroline's warning would linger, unspoken feelings threading between them like unseen currents. And Cole, for all his resolve, would soon learn that redemption demands more than survival. It demands love, courage, and the willingness to face the ghosts one has run from for too long. If this story touches you, if in these words you feel the stir of healing or a spark of curiosity, let your heart leave a trace here. A like, a comment, a quiet subscription is more than support. It is a way of keeping this journey alive, ensuring that Cole and Caroline's path continues to unfold before us. Together we walk with them through shadow and through light. And as the fire crackled low and the night deepened, Cole lifted his eyes to the stars, unaware that the next day would bring him face to face with William Harrington himself, and that destiny, once again, was preparing its hand. The Harrington estate gleamed like a citadel of power against the dying light, its white columns glowing as though the sunset itself bowed before the man who owned half the valley. Cole rode up the gravel path, his horse's hooves crunching in the silence, each step pulling him closer to the heart of the shadow that already pressed against his new life. He had dressed as best he could, a clean shirt, a trimmed beard, but no amount of grooming could erase the truth of what he was, a weathered drifter carrying ghosts in his wake. Harrington would see it in his eyes, just as Cole would see in Harrington's the cold hunger of a man who believed land, law, and lives were his to shape. Inside, the house was a monument to wealth carried west intact. Polished mahogany, chandeliers dripping with crystal, rugs woven in Europe laid across floors that had once known only dust and mud. Cole felt the gulf between them immediately, the aristocrat who had bent the valley to his will, and the soldier who had bled in fields where men's lives were measured in seconds. When Harrington offered him bourbon, smooth and rich, Cole tasted not just liquor, but power, influence, the polished armor of a man who ruled by appearances as much as threats. Their conversation was polite at first, but beneath every word lay sharpened edges. Harrington spoke of opportunity, of the valley's coal seam, of men with vision who built empires while others wasted away in toil. Then the offer came. $2,000 for the Stevens homestead, more than twice what Cole had paid. Generosity, Harrington called it, though the gleam in his eyes betrayed the truth. Cole set his glass down, steady, and replied that the land was not for sale. For a heartbeat, silence held the room like the hush before a storm. Then Harrington's smile returned, thinner now, colder. He spoke of accidents, of misfortunes that befell men alone in wild country. It was not a threat disguised. It was a sentence, handed down with the ease of a man who believed himself untouchable. Yet even in the weight of that moment, Cole thought of Caroline. She had warned him this would come, that Harrington did not extend invitations without purpose. He pictured her eyes, fierce and steady, and drew quiet strength from the memory. It anchored him, steadied him, gave him the calm to meet Harrington's gaze and say with quiet conviction, "I've faced worse." Harrington's smile faltered, just enough to reveal the wound beneath his veneer. He spoke then of the war, of sons lost at Gettysburg, of debts unpaid. Cole felt the blood drain from his face. The name Harrington carried with it ghosts he had tried to bury. Robert Harrington, barely 20, eyes filled with fire, cut down in a clash where survival left no room for mercy. The locket had fallen from the young man's hand that day, and Cole had carried the memory ever since. Now, across this polished desk, he sat facing the father of the boy whose death had haunted him through 2 decades. Fate had not merely caught up with him, It had cornered him, bound him to this valley with chains of blood and history. The evening ended with civility, Harrington's hand extended in farewell, but the promise of war lay heavy between them. Cole rode back through the valley under a full moon, the land silvered and beautiful, yet carrying the weight of what had just been revealed. He passed the split rock where shadows clung thick, and there she was, Caroline, waiting with urgency in her posture, her auburn hair loose beneath her riding hat. She had defied propriety, defied danger, to meet him in the night. Her voice trembled not with fear, but with the intensity of truth. Harrington had killed before, would kill again, had murdered her father under the guise of an accident. She told him what no one else dared, every thread of corruption woven by Harrington's hand. Cole listened, his chest tight with the knowledge that her courage placed her in as much danger as himself. Yet in the moonlight, as she warned him, pleaded with him to understand the stakes, he felt something deeper stir. The valley was no longer just land to be tilled or defended. It had become the place where two wounded souls might find the courage to heal together. Caroline's fire was not simply defiance, it was hope, a reminder that redemption was not about fleeing the past, but facing it with someone who believed in you when you could not believe in yourself. The night closed around them as their words fell to silence, and for a heartbeat they stood closer than they should, bound not by touch, but by something stronger, the certainty that their paths were entwined. Danger circled them in every shadow, but so did possibility. And as the creek murmured beside them and the stars spread wide above, Cole knew this was no longer just his fight. It was theirs. If this story stirs something within you, if the tension, the warmth, the promise of healing speaks to your own heart, let it live beyond these words. Leave a like, share a comment, subscribe to walk further with Cole and Caroline so their journey continues to breathe. Every gesture keeps alive the fire of their redemption. The road ahead would not be gentle. Harrington's wrath was not idle, and his reach extended further than Cole could yet see. But as Caroline rode back into the shadows and Cole returned to his half-built cabin, one truth had already taken root. Love and courage had found their place here, and no threat could erase the spark that had begun to burn. The story would carry forward, through betrayal and battle, through tenderness and trust, into the heart of a valley where redemption demanded both blood and grace. The first shot of dawn had barely colored the horizon when hoofbeats shattered the fragile quiet of Cole's land. He rose from his bedroll with the instincts of a man who had lived too long on the edge of violence, rifle in hand before his boots touched the ground. 6 riders broke through the mist, their silhouettes stark against the pale light. 5 were strangers, with eyes hard as flint. But the 6th Cole knew at once. Caroline Bennett, her auburn hair catching fire in the sunrise, her back straight as though she carried the weight of the valley on her shoulders. For a breath, he thought she had betrayed him, leading enemies to his doorstep. Then he saw her face, pale and strained, and understood. She was caught in something she could not stop. The men reined in near the collapsed barn. Peterson, their leader, spoke grimly, telling of a body hanging in the grove. Cole followed, each step dragging him closer to the truth he had already guessed. Beneath the ancient oaks, Luis Rodriguez swung lifeless in the morning breeze, a sign nailed above him, Harrington's Justice for Thieves. Caroline turned her face away, her lips pressed tight, but Cole stepped forward, steady, cutting the rope with deliberate care. He cradled the man down with the respect given to fallen brothers in war. In the dead man's pocket, he found a small wooden cross, a letter to a family in Mexico. He tucked them away gently, promising to deliver them. In that moment, Caroline looked at him as if something inside her finally eased, seeing not just a drifter with a gun, but a man who carried dignity even for the forgotten. The message was clear. Harrington had chosen Cole's land as the stage for his cruelty. The valley itself was now a battlefield, and Caroline knew it as well as he. She met Cole's eyes, her voice quiet but fierce. "Be careful. He doesn't make threats idly." Cole answered only with a nod, but in the silence between them, something deeper stirred. Trust. Fragile, tentative, but real. That evening, when the sun had dipped low and the sky burned red, Harrington himself came riding with Sheriff Tanner at his side. He wore wealth-like armor, his words smooth, his invitation to dinner delivered with the politeness of a serpent. Cole wanted to refuse, to cast the man's courtesy aside, but Caroline's gaze held his. Her father's words had taught her, "Know thine enemy." She urged him to accept, and Cole did, though every instinct told him it would draw him closer to the fire. Later, when the house quieted and shadows stretched across the land, Caroline came alone to Cole's cabin. The air was heavy with unspoken truths. She told him of her father's death, of Harrington's corruption, of the dangers buried beneath the town's polished surface. Her voice did not tremble, but in her eyes burned grief too long carried. Cole listened, every word binding him tighter to this woman whose courage outshone fear. He confessed little, but his silence spoke volumes. His past was as blood-stained as Harrington's, yet he longed to turn those scars into something healing, something new. Outside, the night deepened, stars bright as if heaven itself bore witness. Inside the half-built cabin, a bond began to form, two weary souls finding in each other a mirror of pain and the faintest glimpse of hope. Neither named it, not yet, but it was there in the way her hand lingered a heartbeat too long on his arm, in the way his voice softened when speaking her name. The valley was no longer just land. It was the ground where love, fragile and untested, had begun to take root. If this story moves you, if you feel the ache of their silence, the warmth of their fragile trust, leave your mark here, a like, a comment, a quiet subscription. These are more than gestures. They are threads that keep their journey alive, reminding us all that healing stories matter, that love can grow even in soil watered by sorrow. Yet the night did not end in peace. As Cole and Caroline parted at the door, the distant sound of riders echoed again through the cottonwoods. Harrington's men were not finished, and neither was fate. The war Cole had tried to leave behind had found him once more, and now it reached for Caroline too. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, and with it choices that would bind them tighter or break them apart. The valley held its breath, and so did they. The night came alive with the hush of danger, every sound sharpened as if the earth itself held its breath. Cole crouched behind the woodpile 30 yards from his cabin, the rifle steady in his hands, though his pulse hammered like a drumbeat. 5 shadows moved through the trees, Jackson among them, his sling-bound shoulder a reminder of the bullet Cole had already given him, and 4 hard-eyed men whose loyalty had been bought with Harrington's coin. Lantern light glowed against the bark of the cottonwoods, and one of the riders carried a torch. Cole understood at once. They hadn't come to frighten him. They'd come to erase him, to burn down his claim, to salt the soil with fear. Inside the cabin, Caroline waited in silence, the derringer hidden within her skirt, just as he had instructed. Her presence gnawed at him more than the threat of bullets. He had told her to hide, told her she still had a chance to slip away, but she had refused with the calm finality of a woman who had already counted the cost of truth. Her father had died for standing against Harrington, and she would not turn her back now. She was fire disguised as grace, and Cole knew that if this valley ever found redemption, it would be because of her. Jackson's voice rang out in the clearing, loud and mocking. "Step out, Bannister. Face justice for Lieutenant Harrington. Make it clean, and the woman doesn't suffer." Cole's jaw tightened. Justice. That word, twisted by Harrington's grief until it became nothing but vengeance. Cole remained still, letting their uncertainty grow. Silence was a weapon, and hesitation could save a life. The torch was lifted high, flames snapping like the laughter of demons. Cole lined up the sights of his rifle, finger poised. Then the cabin door burst open, and Caroline stood framed in the firelight, her voice carrying clear and sure. She spoke of law, of judges who served not Harrington but the governor, of letters already sent that would bring the truth to light. It was a lie, Cole knew, but one spoken with such conviction that even hardened killers faltered. He almost forgot to breathe as he watched her, the curve of her shoulders straight and fearless, her words slicing through the night like scripture. For a moment she seemed more than mortal, a vision of hope rising against tyranny. But Jackson would not be swayed. With a snarl, he flung the torch onto the porch, flames devouring dry wood in an instant. Cole's shot cracked the air, striking Jackson's shoulder once more, spinning him with a cry. Gunfire erupted, the night shattering as bullets splintered wood and tore through the clearing. Cole moved like the soldier he once was, each shot precise, deliberate, born of necessity rather than rage. He fought not for survival alone, but for the woman within those walls and for the promise he had seen in her eyes. Caroline pulled him through the back window as the fire spread, her hands steady, her courage unyielding. She revealed a hidden trapdoor beneath the rug, a tunnel carved long ago by Hiram Stevens in anticipation of Harrington's wrath. Together they crawled through the earth, the roar of flames muffled above, until they emerged by the creek beneath tangled willows. Smoke rose into the night, orange light flickering against their faces as they watched his cabin burn. For Cole, it was more than a home consumed. It was another past life reduced to ash. But for Caroline, it was proof of the fight ahead. She turned to him with fire in her eyes and said what he had long refused to admit. "Harrington will not stop until one of you is dead." Her words pierced him deeper than any bullet. He looked at her, dirt and smoke streaking her face, and thought she had never been more beautiful. She was no longer just the preacher's daughter, no longer simply a guardian of the valley's truth. She was his ally, his anchor, his chance to believe in something beyond vengeance. And though the night still echoed with danger, though their enemies spread through the hills, Cole felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Hope. Fragile, dangerous, yet undeniably alive. If you feel the weight of this moment, the ache of fire and the fragile warmth of trust between them. Let your heart answer. A like, a comment, a quiet subscription is more than support. It is the breath that keeps this story alive, proof that even in shadows, healing words can bloom. The fire behind them was not the end, but the beginning. Harrington had made his move, and Cole now knew there could be no retreat. Beside him rode Caroline, her spirit bound to his in ways neither dared to name yet. Ahead lay storms, betrayals, reckonings written in blood and faith. But for the first time, Cole was certain he would not walk this road alone. The valley whispered its promise, and together they stepped into the darkness, ready for what awaited at dawn. The church bells of redemption rang that Sunday with a sound both pure and heavy, carrying across the valley like a reminder that faith could still stand even when truth was under siege. Cole sat in the back pew, his hat low, shoulders tense, while the congregation filled the small wooden sanctuary with whispers and stolen glances. William Harrington strode to the front with Sheriff Tanner at his side, exuding the confidence of a man who believed the valley belonged to him. And yet it was not Harrington's presence that held the room, it was Caroline. She stepped behind the pulpit with her Bible pressed to her chest, her auburn hair bound neatly, her green eyes alight with something more powerful than fear. When she spoke, the timbre of her voice silenced every murmur. She chose her scripture carefully, telling the story of David and Goliath, but it was not the sling nor the stone she dwelled upon. It was the courage of one soul standing against a tyrant when others trembled. Her words moved like fire through dry grass, igniting hearts dulled by years of Harrington's control. She never named him, yet every glance toward the front pew, every pause that lingered, left no doubt. Cole watched as Harrington's jaw tightened, his smile curdling into something cold. Caroline had dared to challenge him, not with a gun, but with truth. After the service, as people gathered in the sunshine, tension curled around every conversation. Harrington gathered his circle of businessmen, their laughter forced, brittle. Caroline stood surrounded by women and children, her warmth radiating like balm, her strength cloaked in gentleness. Cole saw it then, how the valley already looked to her for guidance, how her presence alone stitched together hope from threads long frayed. When Harrington approached, his words carried mockery, thinly veiled as courtesy, but Caroline answered with grace, her refusal to bow hidden beneath polite tones. Cole, standing at her side, answered Harrington's threats with quiet steel, his eyes unflinching. For the first time in years, he was not just defending himself, he was defending her. That night, as stars spilled across the heavens, Caroline came to him once more, her steps urgent, her voice low with warning. Harrington had uncovered his past. The truth of Gettysburg, the young lieutenant, Robert Harrington, cut down by Cole's bullet, was no longer buried. She urged him to flee, begged him not to let vengeance swallow him whole, but Cole's resolve was steady. He would not run again. He had run long enough. Her hand trembled when it touched his arm, and for an instant the firelight revealed what neither dared yet to name. Devotion born in shadows, love kindled in defiance. The night did not grant them time for tenderness. Riders came again, the thud of hooves shaking the earth. Fire threatened, bullets splintered wood, and yet, side by side they stood. Caroline, her voice unyielding, bluffed their enemies with the authority of scripture and law, while Cole's rifle spoke when words failed. Smoke and flame devoured the cabin, but through the secret tunnel carved by foresight and desperation, they escaped into the creek's embrace, their breath ragged, their clothes torn, their souls bound tighter than before. By dawn, they rode north together toward Peterson's ranch, exhaustion etched into their faces, but hope flickering between them like the fragile flame of a candle. Caroline spoke of her father then, of his journals hidden behind the parsonage hearth, journals that held the truth of Harrington's corruption. Her words carried both pain and healing, a confession of her need to honor his memory and continue his work. Cole listened, his heart stirring with something long denied, for in her voice he heard not only sorrow, but also strength, and it awakened in him the memory of what he once fought for, justice, not merely survival. If this story has touched you, if you feel the weight of danger, the warmth of their fragile trust, the stirring of something healing in the midst of fire, let your heart leave a trace. A like, a comment, or a simple subscription is not only support, but a way to keep their journey alive, proof that stories of love and courage matter. As twilight fell again over the valley, they found brief shelter in an abandoned cabin. Cole kept watch by the window, rifle across his knees, while Caroline sat nearby, the journal's absence a weight still haunting her. She looked at him then, not as a stranger, not as a fugitive, but as the man fate had placed beside her. And though neither spoke the word aloud, love was already there, quietly taking root between them, stronger than the shadows that pressed from every side. Ahead lay betrayal, trial, and the final reckoning. But for the first time, Cole Bannister and Caroline Bennett did not face it alone. The valley had changed. Where once shadows of fear stretched long across the fields, now sunlight poured freely, touching every cabin, every church pew, every quiet corner of redemption with warmth. Months had passed since the night fire consumed Cole's first shelter, since Harrington's fall and the unraveling of secrets that had poisoned the land for years. The scars of those days lingered, yet in their place something new had begun to grow, delicate and steady, like green shoots pushing through soil scarred by fire. Cole Bannister stood on the porch of his rebuilt cabin, the wind carrying the scent of spring grass, the sound of the creek running clear once more, and for the first time in a lifetime he did not feel hunted by ghosts. He felt rooted, present, alive. Caroline rode toward him across the meadow, her auburn hair glinting in the sun, her green eyes bright, her posture regal, as if the valley itself bent to her strength. She dismounted with the grace of someone who belonged to this place as surely as the cottonwoods by the water. They had survived so much: loss, fire, betrayal. And yet what remained between them was not only love, but healing. Cole had thought himself too scarred to ever deserve such tenderness, but Caroline carried no illusions. She had seen his brokenness and still chosen to believe in the man who could rise from it. That evening, as twilight softened the sky, they walked together to the oak tree where her father rested. The words carved on his headstone spoke of truth, courage, and grace, and standing before it, Caroline's hand slipped into Cole's. For years she had borne grief alone, guiding others while burying her own sorrow, but now she shared the weight with him, and together they found peace in silence. Healing was not forgetting, it was remembering without being shattered. And in that stillness, surrounded by wildflowers and birds returning to their nests, Cole realized that redemption was not a place one discovered, but a life one chose to build. In town, the people had begun to whisper differently. No longer about Harrington's power or the fear of his vengeance, but of Caroline's courage in speaking truth, of Cole's quiet resolve, of a future where fairness might prevail. Children ran more freely, the church doors stood open without dread, and Jacob Morgan, now elected mayor, spoke openly of rebuilding with justice at its core. The valley had endured its trial, and from it came a gentler strength, one that soothed like rain on parched ground, one that healed old wounds. Cole and Caroline's bond deepened with every passing day. Their conversations no longer hovered at the edge of danger, but turned toward building a life, where to plant the first crops, how many cattle to graze, how to repair the church roof so it would stand for another generation. There were moments of laughter now, rare and precious, like sunlight after endless storm, and there were moments of quiet, when she would read aloud from her father's journals, her voice steady, her words like balm to the ache Cole still carried from battlefields long past. In those evenings he would look at her and see not only the woman he loved, but the home he had searched for all his life. Love between them was not a sudden blaze, but a steady fire, tended daily, warming the coldest corners of their souls. She had lost so much, yet she gave freely, believing in his strength as he believed in her grace. Together, they created something neither had dared to dream of, a shared future, a place where brokenness did not define them, but became the soil in which hope could root. And though the world around them was still imperfect, they found in each other a healing so profound it felt like prayer answered in flesh and blood. On the morning they finally spoke of marriage, it was not with grandeur, but with simplicity. Caroline asked if he meant to keep drifting when spring ended, and Cole, his hand brushing hers as they watched the valley wake beneath the dawn, said quietly that his wandering was over. His place was here, with her, with the land, with the life they had begun. She smiled, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and answered not with ceremony, but with certainty. Then we build this together. And in that vow lay more promise than any spoken in stone halls or sanctified temples. It was love lived, love chosen, love strong enough to heal what once seemed beyond repair. As the seasons turned, their home grew into more than walls and fields. It became a refuge, a gathering place for neighbors, a symbol that life could rise even from ashes. And though challenges remained, harsh winters, stubborn soil, memories that still haunted their nights, they faced them not as solitary souls, but as one. Healing was not a destination. It was the daily choice to rise, to trust, to love. Together, they made that choice again and again until the valley itself seemed to breathe easier in their presence. And so their story lingers, not as a tale of violence or vengeance, but as a testament that even broken hearts can be mended when love and courage stand side by side. Redemption Valley, once scarred by fear, had become a place of promise, not only for them, but for all who called it home. Cole Bannister and Caroline Bennett had found not just survival, but the kind of love that heals, that warms, that endures. If you feel the tenderness of their journey, if this story has stirred even a small light within you, let it live on. Leave a like, share a comment, or subscribe so their voices may continue to echo. Reminders that no matter how heavy the past, healing and love can still bloom, and redemption is always possible.